not everybody that does cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, opiates, alcohol, not everybody has the disease of addiction. They do it and they let it go. I remember my mom always warning me, because my dad was a severe alcoholic. You know, she was a firm believer that it's hereditary. I think a lot of parents own a lot of guilt and shame because they're like, how did my son or how did my daughter become an addict? They feel like it's a direct reflection on their parenting skills, when in fact, there's nothing that they could have done because their child has the disease of addiction.
For someone watching this who's ready to turn their life around, what is the first thing they should do, or how should they start?
Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome to another episode of Unchained. And I'm super excited to have this episode today. I'm here with my friend Jesse, and Jesse's joining us once again. And we love when Jesse joins us. And we have 8 questions that were taken off of the email that you guys sent in. And can you elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, so we have 8 questions here that we picked that we think best fit what we're talking about today in the podcast. So I'm going to go through and ask Shane kind of his experience, what he thinks on these questions, and he's going to share his advice to these people who asked these questions.
I'll share my experience, but I'm not in the business of giving advice. So
sure,
yeah,
that's fair. Alrighty, well, you just want to hop into it?
Let's get into it, man.
So the first question is, From your experience, what is a way someone who has never dealt with drug problems be a help to somebody who is currently dealing with drug problems?
That's a good question. And I think that it's important for us to touch on this. So there's a lot of people that feel like unless you have lived experience and unless you've actually walked where we walked and, you know, you've had that certain shoe on your foot, you can only help someone struggling with addiction. And I think that there's a tremendous value in that, right? Lived experience can speak to that in a way that someone that hasn't have lived experience can. But that doesn't mean that someone still can't help me if they haven't been through it, right? I mean, they've either seen it through their family members and dealt with it in that way. And I also think it's like, we all have human emotions. We all deal with heartbreak. We all deal with pain. We all deal with some kind of life circumstance that can be traumatic. We've all been through crisis. And so we all have experience with something, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that it would be unfair to just exclude anybody that is willing to help me, you know, with the addiction problem that may not have ever struggled with it.
Yeah. So for this person who's trying to figure out how can I be of help, is there something you would say to them, like, it's, you know, something you can say? Is it just being there for them? What is kind of the first thing that they should be thinking about as they're trying to help somebody with a drug problem?
So I think that's an individual case-by-case basis, right? When I'm in the throes of my active addiction, there's nothing you can say. Mm-hmm. There's nothing anyone can say, whether they've have lived experience with addiction or whether they don't. Words are just not going to land for me. You know, I can't hear anything. I am completely obsessed and obsession and compulsion over using. And there's nothing you can say to stop me. I have to come to a point where life happens or a certain set of circumstances happen that is going to bring me to a place where I feel that I have to stop. And so I don't know that there's anything they can say. I do think it's important that they're always available if that person is ready. Mm-hmm. Like they're available to make the phone calls, maybe do some of the background work for them, maybe lining them up with a treatment facility and just being a support system when the support is, you know, accepted.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense to me, because I'm definitely on that side of, I don't know anybody personally doing drugs, but knowing this, I think, is good information. So now I know, like, it may not be something I can say to them, but just being there for that person is kind of what counts. So I see what you're saying with that. This next question it's interesting. I think I'm curious to see what you think about it. It says, what did drugs give you in the beginning that you thought that you needed? And I don't know if there is something for you, but if there was, do you mind sharing on that?
Absolutely. We kind of touched on it in the last podcast episode where I talked about the first time that I used, I felt like all of the world's expectations of me somehow just disappeared. I didn't have to be anything for anybody. I didn't have to meet anybody's expectation. I was literally able to just escape from all of that pressure. And so for me, that's what it gave me, was an escape from the mundane day-to-day high pressures of, and for me, I was young. So the pressures were school, sports, just different things and expectations of other people that I would achieve some level of success in something.
Yeah.
And sometimes that was a lot, especially when I shared with you guys that, growing up in my household was a little bit unpredictable and a little toxic. And so it didn't scream breeding success in my household. So I think that for me, that's what it did. But I've heard many different stories and experiences of what it does for people. I know that for some people, when they drink, it gives them the courage to act out of character and maybe ask that girl out on a date or maybe get up and sing a song or dance, right?
Yeah.
A lot of us won't dance unless we're intoxicated. And so I think that it's kind of different for everyone, what it offers each individual. But I think in and of its core, it's changing the way we feel. You know what I mean? Because we just don't feel good enough or okay just being where we are and who we are, feeling what we need to feel without having those intoxicants.
Yeah. That's interesting. I think there are so many people probably listening to this that they all have something that they're going through and they all have their own thing. So it's different for each person, which I guess that's probably a difficult question to answer because it is different for everybody. But I'm sure a lot of the stuff about drugs is probably a case-by-case basis. Do you think that's true?
Absolutely. I'm not going to say that there's not a percentage of people with the same experience, but it would be unfair to say that everyone is a cookie-cutter mold of what addiction looks like. And some people venture into it because they had health issues. And maybe they had chronic pain, and before that, they never had an issue with being dependent on a pain medication. But because they took it for a period of time and then they become dependent on it, so their journey was different. Maybe they weren't looking for an escape necessarily. They were just looking to deal with the pain and have some tolerance for pain for whatever was ailing them. And so I just think that it really is a personal journey for everyone, just like recovery becomes a personal journey for everyone.
Yeah. Do you think, out of all the people that you've talked to and out of all the different meetings that you've been to and all of that stuff, what is something, and this is kind of the third question that I'm kind of mixing a little bit, what is something that people often misunderstand about addiction that maybe is it's a very universal misunderstanding, or maybe it's something more specific that people just think for some reason? Are there any misunderstandings about it?
I can share an experience with you, and it goes back to a time where, my mom, she was kind of old school, and I told you she had her battles early on in my early childhood, but then she turned her life over to God and never looked back, right? But she's kind of from the generation before me, or 2 generations before me, and so she was kind of old school in the belief that people were just out here partying. And it's all just one big party and we're having a good time. And it's a choice. You make a choice to not use or drink, and it's just a simple choice. And while that's true for some people that don't suffer from the disease of addiction, but for people like me, in fact, the choice I gave up the minute I put a substance in, right? And so I remember there was a time that I called my mom. This was years and years ago when I was in one of the darkest point of my active addiction. And I called her and I said, "Hey, Mom." And her answer was, "What do you want?" Because that's the kind of place that I've taken her to. Yeah. That's what I've trained her to do, is be defensive. It's always what do I want? And I'm always wanting something from her. And I said, "I don't want anything, Mom. I'm just hungry." And she said, "Well, I'm not going to give you any money." And I said, "Well, I'm not looking for money this time. I really am just hungry, sincerely." And she said, "Well, I'm not coming to take you anywhere else. I'm not coming to give you a ride somewhere. I'm not going to give you money to go in the store. I'm going to come and I'm going to get you something out of the store and bring you the food. into the car. And I said, that's perfectly fine. Like, I understand that.
Yeah.
And so I remember her picking me up, and I remember walking a couple blocks down from where the house that I was at, because the conditions of the living environment that I was at was like, I didn't even want my own mother to see me in that condition. And so she picked me up, took me to the store, and got me something cheap to eat. And I remember her looking at me and her saying to me, baby, why won't you just stop? And in that moment, I was like, look at me. Like, I weighed like 180 pounds soaking wet. Eyes sunk back in my head. I mean, just not a healthy version of myself. And I said, look at me and look at all of the opportunities that I've given away in life. Look at the fact that I chose to continue to use over being a responsible, productive father in my kid's life. And look at all of the freedom that I've given away and being incarcerated. And I said, don't you think that if it was just a simple choice of just stopping, that I wouldn't have done this a million consequences ago? And so, she just couldn't understand that. And I think that that's one of the biggest, most misunderstood things by people is they just think we're out here making a choice.
Yeah.
And there are still people that believe that today in this generation. They think that this whole disease of addiction thing is just a crutch. It's just an excuse to say that you have a sickness so that you can continue to use drugs. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Like, I mean, trust me, nobody wants to endure the life of an addict. Nobody wants to endure that kind of pain, that kind of destruction, that kind of consequence. I mean, honestly, it's not, nobody's saying I want to sign up for that. It's definitely not just a choice. Now, I will agree that in the beginning, there is a choice to partake in substances. And like some of us make that choice and then we just never stop. But once we're in active, full-blown addiction, there's no choice. The only choice is to continue to do more.
So is that like a light switch that gets turned on, or is it more like a gradual step by step? It becomes like at first, you don't really, it is a choice and you don't want to say no, but then maybe next time it's less of a choice. So is it more immediate or is it?
The disease of addiction is progressive, 100%. I will say at what rate it's progressive is back to that case by case individual basis.
Right.
I know people that, within months they were full-blown active addiction, doing really hard drugs and stealing and doing crazy stuff to get those drugs. And I also know, like for me, it was a gradual thing where I started really young, participating in smoking weed and drinking sociably, and thought that I could continue to drink sociably throughout my teenage years. And then before you knew it, I was like 16 and I was facing consequences already for my drinking. And I wasn't stopping even with the consequences. So that's when I first realized that I might just have like a real problem. So I think that it's back to that case by case basis.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned something that I had to write down, a new question that I had. You talked about the environment that you lived in, and you talked about because of that environment, that's kind of what started the path of addiction for you, and that's your story. But how does the environment that someone lives in, how much do you think that affects whether they get into drugs, or do you think there's more to it than just the environment?
So I'm gonna keep reiterating this because I think it's important. This is my disclaimer here is this is my interpretation of everything, right? There's a difference between just getting into drugs and having the disease of addiction, right? And so I firmly believe that people, they don't just become addicts because they start using drugs. I think that they have the disease of addiction. There's a mental illness going on long before they pick up the first substance. I'm a firm believer in that. At least for me, that was the case, and for many other people I know. And so the characteristics were already there, and it didn't matter what the home life looked like. And that you can kind of back that evidence up with, you take a young man or a young lady from a very respectful, responsible, moral home, and they end up addicted to drugs and doing the most crazy things to get those drugs, in and out of rehab and jail, and destroying their life because of those drugs that came from a good home, that came from good parents, that instilled good moral, upbringing. And then you also can take a child that was living in a home full of addicts and alcoholics, and they never drank or did drugs, and they were successful in whatever endeavors they tried to accomplish in life. So that's why, for me, it just backs up the evidence that the disease of addiction has nothing to do with the environment.
Yeah.
Right? Now, do I think the environment, you're more probable to experiment with drugs and alcohol if your environment is conducive to that? Then absolutely. But everybody that experiments with drug or alcohol, they don't end up addicted. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's got to be science there to that, right? There are plenty of people out there that can enjoy a glass of wine, that can have, there are even people out there can do some cocaine recreationally, and they don't destroy their life over it. It's something they partake in, maybe on a holiday with a family member, and then they never go back to it. Like they do it that one time because they don't have the disease of addiction. Not everybody that does cocaine, methamphetamine, heroin, opiates, alcohol, not everybody has the disease of addiction. They do it and they let it go. But people that have the disease of addiction, there's a reward factor there. There's something that happens that is so great, much greater for them, that they keep going back to it.
But you don't know who you are, like which one you are.
You don't know which one you are, so you're playing Russian roulette. That's a good point. I mean, I remember my mom always warning me, because my dad was a severe alcoholic. You know, she was a firm believer that it's hereditary. And I don't discount that. I think that there's a very good chance that addiction and that mental illness that goes with that can be passed on through genes, and it is hereditary. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying there's a good possibility of that. I don't have any clinical proof of that. But what I will say is, she would warn me and say, hey, you don't need to drink because your dad is a severe alcoholic. And then, you know, obviously I didn't listen to that, and I drank anyway. And then I became addicted. So, you know, I think that it's important, though, that we just always remember, because I think a lot of parents own a lot of guilt and shame, because they're like, how did my son or how did my daughter become an addict? They feel like it's a direct reflection on their parenting skills, when in fact, there's nothing that they could have done because their child has the disease of addiction.
And also, it's also their choice. So you can, and I mean, it's like the whole idea of, as a Christian, God doesn't force you to do things. You know, God gives you free will and he lets you make your own decision. Because if he didn't, then, you know, people, it's like that phrase, it's like we'd just be robots, like walking around being forced to love God. So if you look at it from that point of view, you know, the parents, they gave their children freedom at some point, and ultimately they may have chosen wrong, but that doesn't mean that it was wrong for the parents to give their kids the freedom, you know? That's kind of, those are my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And it goes back to the Russian roulette. Like, am I going to fall in the path of someone with the disease of addiction? Or am I going to be a normal person that partakes in having a beer with wings on Saturday, watching a football game, one beer, and then I go home and I take care of my responsibilities? Which one of those people am I going to be?
Yeah.
And you're right. None of us really know that until we partake and see.
Yeah. Well, question number 4, we are about halfway done with this, is this is interesting. What did addiction take away from your life that you didn't expect? I think before you answer, there are a lot of things that you would expect addiction to kind of take control of, you know? But are there any things in your life, and you can share on the things that you maybe would expect it to take over, and it did take over, but is there anything ultimately that you didn't think about that it did end up taking over?
So I think that again, there's no one answer for this, because at different stages of the timeline of my addiction, it took over different things. And so I probably, in the very beginning, never thought that it would create so many consequences in my life. I never thought that I would choose drugs and alcohol over being a good father, you know? And don't get me wrong, there were times where I was a really good father. Like I loved my children. I was trying to do the best that I could, but I didn't even understand that I had such a severe disease of addiction. I didn't understand any of it. And so I just kept trying to stop using self-will until I would cycle back around to using again, and then it obviously destroying whatever situation I had going on at the time, whether it was job, places to live. But I kept continuing to recycle back into that, and so it took away the relationship with any of my children for a long time. And I guess if you asked me early on, did I expect that to happen, I would have told you no. It took away my ability to stay in school and get an education. And I probably would have not thought that early on. I thought I would just figure it out somehow. And it also took away my ability to have any longevity and success at any particular job, which I was one of those people that my mom instilled a really good work ethic in me. And so I climbed the ladder, whatever that was, and whatever occupation I chose at the time, really fast. And I became management or some type of leader in that company really fast, only to destroy it later with addiction. And I did that over and over again. We're not talking about one job or two, we're talking about multiple opportunities where I would work from the bottom, make my way to the top, and then destroy it. And so I guess honestly, in different stages of my life and whatever age and whatever I was doing during those different times of my life, like I never expected the next thing to be taken, or the next part of my life to suffer because of addiction, until all of those things suffered. And then my freedom eventually, right? And that was probably the last thing that I remember. And I think the next thing, we talk about this in the program, there's the ending goal or the end outcome of addiction is jails, institutions, and death. And so I'd already been to institutions and I'd already been to jail. So there was only one more option left on the table for me. And so, and fortunately, that wasn't one that it took from me, was my life.
Wow. Yeah, I think you answered that question really well. In addiction, this is the fifth question. In addiction, what were you feeling internally that people couldn't see? And then I'm going to expand on this and say, maybe in somebody else's life, maybe if they haven't done drugs yet, but if they were to find themselves in that position, what do you think they would see about, what do you think they would feel about themselves internally that people wouldn't see?
We hide this really well. When I say we, I don't like speaking for other people. I will say there are a lot of people that share the same mentality or the same thinking pattern, but we hide really well that we don't care about what other people think, that we're okay, that we're managing it. We're managing it. I'm not using like those other people. I'm managing it and putting on a good front to try to seem like we have it more together than we actually do. But on the inside, we're like rotting away, like hating ourselves and not even be able to look into the mirror and not just hate everything about me because of the state my life has come to, right? And I think that at face value, you can't always see that in somebody. I mean, there are signs typically when we're in our very, very deepest state of active addiction. Obviously, physically, there are signs, even sometimes with our body language and mannerisms. But especially along that journey, like we will hide it for as long as we possibly can because we don't want to be called out on it.
Yeah.
And so I think that you can't see that self-hatred and that self-loathing and that like hopelessness. You know what I mean? And at some point, all of those feelings will shine through because whenever you get to that last stage of your active addiction, I mean, it's all over you, you know? I always say all the time, like people see the outward unmanageability, which is the can't keep a job, physically we look sick, there's less hygienical, you know, we're not taking care of our skin. You know, there's signs outwardly, and there's consequences outwardly that show outward unmanageability, but it's that internal unmanageability. That's what you can't always see. And so in that spiritual just bankruptcy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. This next question is, I have it marked as the final question because I think this is not only a great closing question, but also the question that most stuck out to me. So I'm actually going to come back to this question, and then I have two more,
Okay.
and then we'll go to that one. So number 2, or I guess this is number 6. Are there struggles people don't expect to... Wait, hold on. Are there still struggles people expect to still exist? Wait a second.
Pause. We're having technical difficulties.
I wrote this in a hurry. Are there still struggles people don't expect to still exist even after recovery but do? Does that question make any sense?
Yes. I mean, so
Sounds like there are a lot of different answers for this.
yeah, I mean, and I hate to, I'm not ever, I don't want you to ever feel like I'm continuing to like correct something you're saying.
No.
Or
These
something
are...
they're saying. But so there is no after recovery. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
For me, recovery is an ongoing process. And so
That's good to hear.
I just need to keep reiterating things like that because it's never a past tense when it comes to recovery. It's a current, present day situation, right?
Yeah. Well, that, in a sense, almost answers the question, though.
Yeah, it does. Because, you know, when I first get clean, I tell people all this because you guys know that I work for a treatment facility. I help place people in mental health and substance abuse treatment every day. That's what I do. And so I instill in each one of those people, especially if it's their first time around, that if you're going into this place, like just know this is the very tip of the iceberg. Like this is the very beginning, first step into the work that you're going to have to undergo in the internal changing that you're going to have to do. So like this 30-day program, if you think you're just going to hop out of here and you're going to be better, then you're probably going to end up back here. Because there's a lifelong journey of continuing to grow. There's a lifelong journey of and for all of us as human beings, right? But the things that are at stake for us are if we hop out and just self-will it and think we're better out of a 30-day program because we've had some abstinence, all we've done is remove the symptom. And then and only then can we work on the disease.
Yeah.
But we have to remove the symptom. And so that is the answer. The answer is once I've gotten clean, now I have a lifelong full of work and changing and things to undergo so that I can become a better person, so that I can become less likely to go back to that life.
So one of the first things that you tell people is, or tell someone that's kind of just starting the journey, is that it is a journey and it's a long journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat anything for anyone. Like understand that, because I need you to understand that if you're going into this right now thinking you're going to hop out in 25, 30 days and your life is you're just going to be able to do it. It's just going to work for you. And listen, I can't say that there's not one needle in a haystack out there. I can't say that, but I've never seen it with my own eyes. I've never seen somebody just hop out of a 30-day treatment program and live the rest of their life and have all these fundamental changes, core changes. And, you know, I've just never seen that. And so without ongoing maintenance and work. So,
yeah. This second to last question is, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on this, because I feel like I've heard you touch on this before, but I'd like to hear more. What would you say to somebody saying that could never happen to me? Looking at someone's life going downhill, someone getting addicted to drugs. Maybe they've never tried drugs before and they don't plan on it. So they're saying to themselves, that could not happen to me.
well, if they've never tried drugs and they don't plan on it, then that increasing the odds that may not happen to them, that's actually a pretty good bet, right? That doesn't mean it won't happen to them in some area of their life, you know. It doesn't always mean drugs or alcohol is what brings you down. Some people have sex problems. Some people have gambling problems. There could be many different ways that people's life could get destroyed. But in this sense, what we call that in our recovery rooms typically in recovery program is the yets, right? This hasn't happened yet. And so a lot of times people will come in and they're young. They're like 20, 21 years old or 19 years old. Maybe we even had people come in at 15 and 16 years old.
Wow.
And so, and then I'm always kind of like just sitting back watching, because you never really know, if that person at that age has suffered enough pain and consequences to really grab a hold of this thing and surrender to it.
Mm-hmm.
You just never know, because, sometimes, and I have seen it where people come in at 19 and 20 years old and they've had enough. Whatever they've endured was enough for them to jump in, surrender, and start to recover. Mm-hmm. But I would say more often than not, they listen to all of the stories that people are sharing, their predecessors, the elders in the room that have suffered all of these consequences, that have sold themselves for drugs, that have robbed stores and went doctor shopping and hopping and wrote fake prescriptions and went to prison over it, and have suffered all of these major consequences. And they're listening to all of that, and they're like, well, I haven't done any of those things, so do I really even belong here? But we always tell them, listen, these are all yets for you. Mm. You can change the course and the direction of your life right now, and you do not have to endure some of these things, mm-hmm. but you might have to. You might have to. And that's the reality of the disease of addiction. There is no 100% confidence in me when I share with somebody young that they're going to listen and they're going to take the suggestions that I give them and the experience that I'm sharing with them, mm-hmm. and use that to the benefit their life, because more often than not, that's not the case.
Yeah. That's interesting. Final question here.
Okay.
This is the big one. This is one that I think is a great way to end this episode. For someone watching this who's ready to turn their life around, what is the first thing they should do, or how should they start?
So I think if somebody's watching this right now and you actually have a little bit of willingness to do something different, it's super important for me when I'm in that state of mind that I have a little bit of willingness to do something different, that I find a way to remove the symptom. I find a way to get abstinent, no matter what that means and no matter what that looks like. That can mean going into treatment. That can mean calling me and we could get you involved in a treatment program. Or that can mean, you go away to a family member's house miles from where you're using and try to get clean there. And then just remember that that's just the beginning, right? Removing the symptom is the beginning.
Yeah.
And then find a way in a program and something that fits for you, whether that's an AA meeting or an NA meeting or a faith-based recovery meeting or whatever works for you. Find that where there's like-minded people with one commonality, one common goal, which is how are we going to stay clean? How are we going to stay sober? How can we all work together to do that and accomplish that using each other's experience, strength, and hope, and just get involved with that. That would be the first start for me that I would suggest to anyone, is we have to get away from the drug. We have to get away from the alcohol. You know what I mean?
And if anyone here doesn't know how to start, you have an email, right? We actually put it up on the screen every week. They can reach out to you, right? Absolutely.
And I don't mind if you put my cell phone number up there as well. Like if you guys are just like on the fence, you really don't know where to turn, and you just want somebody to talk to about it. I'm definitely not in the business of judging people. I'm not qualified to judge people. There's only one that does that, and I'm not him. And so, but I will hear you out, and I will share my experience, strength, and hope with you. I can't promise you that what I'm going to say is going to make you take that final step. But I can say that sometimes just knowing that you're not alone, sometimes knowing that somebody out there has been where you are and that has walked through some of that same pain and that same hopelessness. Literally sometimes just that alone can change somebody's life. Mm. You know what I mean? Because they don't feel completely broken. So.
Yeah. And on the topic of your email that we just put up, you can use that email, and just like these questions right here, you can email us your questions, and when we get enough, we will do another episode just like this, going through even more questions. So if you didn't like these questions, or let's say you have a question that you just wished you could have just kind of thrown onto us right now, you can do that with the email. So
absolutely, we encourage you to do that. This helps us be interactive with you guys, and it helps us also just be able to share with you guys what we're trying to do here, which is we're trying to help people in many different ways, but one of the main ways I think is to be a resource for people that are struggling with addiction or struggling with anything really. Reach out to us and we'll do the best we can in either finding you an answer or giving you an experience, strength, and hope answer that we have. So
yeah. Also, click the subscribe button and the like button. And if you have somebody who you think could not even learn something, but also just enjoy hearing us talk about this, then click the share button and then sending that to somebody you might know. And I think that's it, right, Shane?
absolutely, that's it, man. Thank you so much.
Alrighty.
We'll tune in next
Absolutely.
time and we'll see you next Shane Unchained podcast, baby. See ya.